Hi.
Hello. Franz goes on talking about an article from the 1943 Watchtower, July 1st. The article is called Righteous Requirements, and it's in the wake, of course, of Rutherford's death. Is the organization going to continue in this insistent mode, this arrogant mode that Rutherford left as his legacy, or not? Well, let's see. Although written during the year following Rutherford's death, an article titled Righteous Requirements, published in the July 1, 1943 Watchtower, pages 204 to 206, illustrates the attitude of total submission to the organization that had been inculcated in Jehovah's Witnesses during his presidency. It shows, too, how an organization can plainly and unabashedly ask people to equate what it says with what God himself has said. Consider these quotations from this article. Quote, "Every organization requires specific instructions for all those who serve in it. In the past, the Lord issued his organization instructions to his servants through his central agency or channel. Each one joyfully accepted his part therein and faithfully carried it out. Now, the apostle says, Jehovah speaks to us through his Son," and here they cite Hebrews 1 and 2. They go on, "The Son has returned as king. He has come to his temple. He has appointed his faithful and wise servant, who is his visible mouthpiece, and says to those who are privileged to represent him upon the earth, this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations."
Continuing the quote, "These expressions of God's will by his king and through his established agency constitute his law or rule of action for the faithful and wise servant, and for their goodwill companions today, who will dwell upon the earth forever in the new world. The Lord breaks down our organizational instructions further and makes them more practicable by further instructing us through his faithful and wise servant. He says, let us assign the field, the world, to special pioneers, regular pioneers, and companies of Jehovah's Witnesses in an orderly way, sufficient for everyone to thoroughly witness therein, and let us place upon each one the responsibility of caring for the new world interests in these respective assignments. He says, the requirements for special pioneers shall be 175 hours and 50 back calls per month, which should develop into a reasonable number of studies. And for regular pioneers, 150 hours and as many back calls and studies as can be properly developed during that time. And for company publishers, he says, let us make a quota of 60 hours and 12 back calls and at least one study a week for each publisher. These directions come to us from the Lord through his established agency, directing what is required of us, and for those who really love the Lord and are guided by his counsel, that is a reasonable service requirement. This expression of the Lord's will should be the end of all controversy. It is for your good that these requirements are made, for thereby you are enabled to prove your integrity and magnify the Lord's name.
So we got it straight. When the Watchtower establishes quotas, that is the Lord saying it.
Yeah.
Okay. These directions come from the Lord to us as individuals and as collective units called companies, which was the way they described congregations in those days. Almost everyone who is consecrated to the Lord recognizes that a company requires organization in order to function properly. But not all of these same brethren appreciate the fact that they, as individuals, require just as complete an organization to carry out their individual responsibilities as the company does. To illustrate, all realize that every company, that is congregation, should have a definite assignment of territory in which to witness, but not all appreciate that each individual in that company should have his or her own personal assignment of territory in which to witness. It is just as foolish for a publisher to conclude that he can serve the Lord properly without a personal assignment as it would be for a company to decide that it could function acceptably to the Lord without a territory assignment. A company is required to have an assignment and to systematically work in it, from house to house, make back calls, conduct book studies, notice, and generally aid the people of goodwill. They are to carry on all the forms of magazine work in that assignment. They logically hold their own city and such adjacent territory as they can properly handle. It would be the height of foolishness for them to leave their own city and go to a city 20 miles away, held by someone else, and try to systematically witness in it. Every intelligent person will admit that that would be not only foolishness, but rank unfaithfulness to the Lord. The same principle applies to the publisher who refuses to accept the responsibility for a personal assignment of territory and have that assignment as close as possible to his home. The farther away from his home that assignment is, the less time he will have to devote to it, and the more difficult it will be to give proper attention to the interest in the territory. Consequently, it is a measure of unfaithfulness to the Lord to thus waste time and energy that belongs to him.
The time has come when each one must bear his own burden fully before the Lord, with the provisions that the Lord has now made with the provisions that the Lord has now made in supplying us with new books, question booklets which contain complete instructions for properly carrying on a study, etc. There is absolutely no excuse for anyone, man or woman, to claim to be unable to accept an individual territory assignment and assume full responsibility for it. Those who really love the Lord and are fighters for the new world will not try to excuse themselves on that or any other ground, but will hear the word of the Lord when he says, "Let us do thus and so," and always keep in mind that the us includes the Lord, who will be with you in every undertaking.
The Lord, through his faithful and wise servant, now states to us, "Let us cover our territory 4 times in 6 months." That becomes our organization instructions and has the same binding force on us that his statement to the Logos had when he said, "Let us make man in our image."
Well,
It is our duty to accept this additional instruction and obey it. But someone will say, the conditions are different. In the case of the Logos, he could accomplish what Jehovah commanded him to do. But when it comes to covering our territory 4 times in 6 months, that is out of all reason. We have never covered it more than once or at the most twice in 6 months. It just can't be done. We have all heard that argument before, and if it were true, it would look bad indeed, and would imply that the Lord was asking us to do something that is impossible for us to accomplish. The children of Israel walked around Jericho 7 times the last day. The territory now being covered 1 to 2 times in 6 months could very easily be covered 4 to 6 times in the same period, if everyone took his kingdom responsibility seriously.
pressure.
This is not theory, but actual facts based on figures gleaned from a number of companies during the past 6 months.
Continuing in the same quotes from 1943. To do this may mean taking time and effort that is now being devoted to old world interests and transferring them to new world interests, which are of God and shall abide forever. The words of the Apostle Peter are to the point in this respect. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness? That was a quote from 2 Peter 3. Before real progress will be made in increasing our activity, we must each one recognize these calls to action as coming from the Lord and applying to us personally, and respond to them wholeheartedly. The New World Government is 29 years old. Consequently, it should be kept before the minds of the people at all times, by calling at their homes and telling them about it, by making back calls and conducting studies with them, by working business territory and calling on them in their offices. They shall be witnessed to on the streets with all our magazines, publishers presenting the message of the New World. No matter where they go, the people should have always before them the evidence that the New World government has begun to function.
Wow, this is, well, unbelievable.
Yeah, wow, pressure.
Considering that almost all the publications up to that point had either Russell's name and now Rutherford's name on the front cover or inside the cover. It is for me beyond belief, as Ray himself expressed it in the subsequent segment, which we'll get to next time, that he could have ever believed this, that anybody could ever grab this, because it's very plain from this extended quote that the message that they're being told to preach endlessly and aggressively here is about 1914.
Yeah.
And it's signed by Rutherford himself.
But it is a kind of a study in psychological manipulation, because if you keep hearing over and over again something, you start to believe it. So in this case, they're being told, this is the Lord telling you this, and you must do this. Remember, this is from the Lord. This is what the Lord says. It's not us, it's the Lord. If you say that over and over again to people, how can they say anything but, okay, I'll do what you say, because it's from the Lord.
Of course, they've been through this once before, when the Great Purge occurred in the 1920s, the evidence being the statistics for the Lord's Supper that year were way down in the late 1920s, because the insistence before that was that Russell's books be carried by colporteurs, by everybody.
Yeah.
Now it's Rutherford's message, and of course now it's going to change in 1943 and onwards. It's going to change to an anonymous message, but with the same arrogant insistence. And so, as we said in the next segment, Ray marvels that he ever could have accepted this.